It's a special Tuesday night edition of Todd's Odds with our sports betting expert, Todd Fuhrman, brought to you by FanDuel. And Todd, you thought the Canucks had a good chance to upset the Oilers in the second round. It did not happen, but the Oilers needed 7 games to move on to the conference final, where they are a slight underdog to the Dallas Stars. Todd, my first question for you, does the idea of taking the Oilers at plus money to win the conference final intrigue you in any way?
Well, first things first, Jay, let's be honest here. I love Rick Tocchet and the kind of reclamation project he was able to get going in Vancouver this year, but typically you have to generate more than 5 shots on goal through the first 30 minutes of a Game 7 to put yourself in a good position to win hockey games. But kudos to the Canucks, a phenomenal season, and you wonder if it would have been any different if Brock Besser was out there. But when you look at the price on the Western Conference Finals right now, look, I think Dallas is rightfully installed as a favorite, knowing they'll have home ice advantage. Of course, we're going to monitor the injury reports there. Will Roope Hintz be able to contribute at a high level? But I'm never going to rule out a team like the Edmonton Oilers with the kind of star power that they boast. The biggest question that I have with the Oilers, and I think everybody throughout the NHL does as well, can Stuart Skinner stand up to an increased workload? Because credit the Oilers. They did an incredible job of insulating him in Games 6 and 7 against Vancouver. But Dallas is going to come wave after wave. And ultimately, I think Jake Ottinger's ability to steal a game is what moves Dallas on to the Stanley Cup final.
Now, over in the East, we know that the Rangers are the President's Trophy winners. They had the best record in the regular season. They've got home ice advantage throughout the postseason. And yet, Todd, the Florida Panthers are favored to win the Eastern Conference Final. As a former odds maker at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, my question for you is, why? Why are the Florida Panthers favored? And how would you approach this series?
You know, honestly, Jay, I actually made Florida a bigger favorite than the way they're currently being priced in the market. We can hit the rewind button and look at the Rangers series against the Carolina Hurricanes, where the Hurricanes closed right in that $1.60, $1.65 range. But going back to January, I talked about Florida and how I thought they checked every box for a team that had all the makeup to make a repeat run to the Stanley Cup final and maybe eventually get over the hump. So you look at Florida, they actually opened a little bit shorter in this series. They've been bet out some. And while I don't want to ignore the Rangers having home ice advantage, you look up and down these two lineups, and other than Igor Shesterkin in net, I'm not sure where the Rangers have an advantage. And unlike Carolina that struggled despite generating chances and dominating a lot of the underlying metrics, you have elite level goal scoring capabilities from Florida up front with Matthew Tkachuk, Carter Verhaeghe, Sasha Barkov, just to name a few. I think Florida is going to find a way to wear the Rangers down. And as long as Florida makes sure they keep their head on a swivel and don't give up shorthanded goals like the Rangers were able to execute against the Carolina Hurricanes, I think we're talking about the Panthers dispatching the Rangers in 6, unless Igor plays out of his mind, which we know he's capable of doing.
Now, having said all that, you could make a pretty strong argument, Todd, that the Final Four in the Stanley Cup playoffs were the 4 best teams of the regular season this year. There's really no overwhelming favorite. There's no overwhelming long shot at this point. So having said all that, is there a value bet to be made on a Cup winner at this point?
I mean, look, Jay, I know I hemmed and hawed throughout football season. You ask me every week, could I name the team I thought was going to hoist the Lombardi Trophy? Who I thought was going to be the Super Bowl champion? I waited until the week before the Super Bowl, and I still got that wrong, taking the San Francisco 49ers to knock off the Kansas City Chiefs. But for folks who have tuned into this lovely segment that we've been doing for quite some time now, hopefully they have a little bit of exposure to the Dallas Stars that we tipped out in early October, said this was a team that had all the makings of a Stanley Cup contender. And back in early January, we thought Florida was going to be able to make a deep run. So we should have a little bit of exposure to those two teams. And honestly, I'm going to stand pat. The Rangers and Edmonton are going to give each of their opponents plenty and then some. But I think we're still talking about a Dallas Star Florida Panther final. And you know what that means, Jay? We get to kick back with our feet up if that ultimately unfolds. And regardless of who wins, we'll be able to cash a big-time futures ticket.
I'm so glad you brought up the fact that we used to ask you all year last year for your Super Bowl pick each and every segment. You know, since we last spoke, the NFL schedule's been released. OTAs are underway. We're about 100 days to kick off of the National Football League season. So it seems like a perfect time to ask you, Todd, who is going to win the Super Bowl? Super Bowl 59 on February the 9th, 2025 in New Orleans, Louisiana.
I mean, look, Jay, that's a phenomenal question and one where I wish I had an answer for you. But the one thing I will tell you right now, when you look at the 49ers as the short favorite on the big board, I wouldn't be investing in them this far out. You look at the Niners schedule, they're going to have to work against a bit of adversity when it comes to having short rest. You look at how the league has placed a lot of emphasis on getting the best teams, the most exposure on primetime, and that'll work against the 49ers. So I definitely wouldn't be gobbling up that 5-1. I'm not running to bet the Chiefs at 6-1. And I think the Houston Texans have become everybody's favorite darling, but those numbers have shortened a ton. So you know what, Jay? We're going to hem and haw again our way to the start of the NFL season. We can't reveal the script now, otherwise no one to tune in every Sunday, Thursday, Wednesday, and every other day that we're going to get NFL football starting in earnest in early September.
And this makes sense. Leave them wanting more. That's what George Costanza always said. Todd Fuhrman, you're the best. Thanks for this. We'll chat with you next week.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
And when we return, Todd's favorite segment, it's the On Rights and Wrongs, Canada's most popular sports television segment.